The storm was wild, but what waited on her porch was wilder thunder clawed at the rooftops of suburban Oregon, rattling window panes and sending rivulets of rain streaming down the streets in silver torrents. Inside a weathered two-story house at the end of Sycamore Lane, Julia Monroe hunched beneath a worn patchwork quilt, flashlight in hand, her voice steady and calm as she read aloud to her daughter Nora. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the living room in stark white. Nora, all skinny legs and tangled hair, squeezed closer, clutching her faded stuffed rabbit to her chest. Julia paused to glance at the windows. Each rumble of thunder brought a twinge of unease. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe it was 9 months of trying to hold her little family together since David's heart had given out on a cold January morning. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and tried to focus on the story. Nora's eyes, wide and blue as storm clouds, tracked every word, but Julia could tell her daughter was listening more to the wind than to the fairy tale. A loud crash echoed from the front porch, so sudden and sharp that both mother and daughter jumped. The flashlight beam wobbled across the room. Julia's heart thudded. "Probably just a branch," she murmured, but her words sounded unconvincing, even to herself. Nora's whisper cut through the dark. "Mom, did you hear that?" Julia nodded, throat tight. She moved cautiously to the window, pulling the curtain aside. Rain slashed across the glass. For a heartbeat, she saw nothing. Then, movement. A dark, hunched figure, barely visible through the downpour, staggered on the porch. Not a person, she realized. A dog. Big, broad-shouldered, with soaked fur plastered to a gaunt frame. It slumped against the door, legs trembling, head hanging low. Julia's breath caught. Was it dangerous? Was it hurt? She flicked the porch light on. The dog looked up, golden eyes reflecting the light with a wild, pleading glimmer. Mud and blood streaked its paws. It bore the marks of some unseen struggle, a gash on its flank, ragged fur around its neck. Nora pressed close to her mother's side, voice barely a whisper. "We have to help him." Julia hesitated. Her mind raced through possibilities. Rabies, animal control, the possibility of bringing a strange, wounded animal into her house with her daughter. But something about the dog's eyes held her. He looked desperate, yes, but more than that. He looked lost. Or maybe it was just her own loneliness projecting onto him. She unlocked the door, heart pounding. The storm's roar rushed in. The dog made no move to attack or bark. Instead, he whimpered, tried to stand, and crumpled back to the mat. Nora knelt beside him, heedless of the cold rain soaking her pajamas. She touched the dog's head, gentle as a prayer. "His name is Rex," she said softly, as if she'd always known. "He's been looking for us." Julia blinked. "Nora, how do you—" But Nora only smiled, blue eyes shining with a strange certainty. "He told me." The dog, Rex, seemed to find strength in Nora's touch. He gazed at Julia, a silent question in his eyes. Julia felt her resistance crumble. She wrapped the quilt around Nora's shoulders, and together, they eased Rex over the threshold. The dog staggered inside, bringing the storm with him. Muddy paw prints, the sharp scent of rain, and a sudden, tense energy that prickled the air. Julia fetched a towel from the bathroom and knelt beside Rex, dabbing at the worst of the blood. He flinched, but did not growl. Instead, he looked at her, as if searching for something familiar. Nora, already forming a bond, whispered words only the dog seemed to understand. She stroked his ears, humming under her breath. Lightning cracked again, and for a split second, Julia saw the three of them, herself, her daughter, and this battered, loyal animal, huddled together against the wildness outside. She felt something shift, an old ache easing, a new worry growing. A clock chimed midnight somewhere in the house. The power flickered, went out, then returned. Julia glanced at the front door, still unlocked. Instinct told her to bolt it, but she hesitated, listening to the rain, feeling the weight of the decision she'd just made. Letting a stranger in, trusting a wounded animal, hoping against reason that this wasn't a mistake. She picked up her phone, hand trembling, considering calling animal control or the late-night vet. But something about the way Rex pressed close to Nora made her pause. The storm outside raged on, but within these walls, a new, fragile peace had begun to form. As Julia settled Nora back on the couch, wrapping her daughter and the dog in blankets, she caught herself whispering, "It's going to be okay." Whether she meant it for her daughter, for the dog, or for herself, she wasn't sure. Outside, the thunder faded into a distant growl. Inside, Rex rested his head on Nora's lap, eyes finally closing, breath slowing. For the first time in months, Julia felt like the storm might actually pass. Yet in the silence, she couldn't shake the sense that this night had changed everything, that fate, or grief, or something stranger, had just stepped through her front door. And somewhere, in the darkness beyond the porch, unseen eyes watched the house, waiting. The rain finally eased after midnight, but the house still shivered in the storm's wake. Julia sat awake in bed, the digital clock blinking 2:34 a.m., its pale numbers floating in the dark. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed the image of the battered dog, Rex, lying beside her daughter. The old ache in her chest, carved deep by months of grief, pulsed anew. Her ears picked up every creak and sigh in the house, and every distant rumble of thunder made her flinch. Down the hall, Nora's bedroom glowed with the faint light of her nightlamp. The soft hum of a lullaby played on repeat, but even that comfort seemed fragile tonight. Rex, still damp but clean and wrapped in towels, lay curled at the foot of Nora's bed. He had refused to rest anywhere else, pushing past Julia's gentle coaxing to settle in the living room. Nora, wrapped around her stuffed rabbit, slept deeply, her breath steady for the first time in months. Julia watched them for a while, arms crossed, heart wrestling with confusion and wonder. Why had this animal, hurt, lost, and alone, found his way to their house? Why had Nora reacted not with fear, but with a strange, serene certainty? The questions circled endlessly, never finding answers. Unable to sit still, Julia moved back to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water, tracing the outline of the fridge magnets as if they could ground her. Rain pattered against the window, softer now. She let her thoughts drift, back to the hospital corridors, where she'd spent years calming terrified families, to the January night when her husband David had collapsed at their feet, to the hollow days that followed. Her memory flashed. David, smiling in the kitchen, flipping pancakes for Nora. He'd joked about getting a dog, maybe a German shepherd, loyal and gentle, someone to keep Nora company when he worked late. Julia had always resisted, saying they were too busy, that pets brought more worry than joy. Now, the silence left by his absence felt so much larger, and a part of her wished she'd said yes back then. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl drifted down the hall. Julia tensed, setting her glass down. She crept toward Nora's room, heart hammering. The house seemed to shrink around her, shadows deepening. At the doorway, she saw Rex, head up, fur bristling, eyes fixed on a dark corner of the room. He was utterly still, except for a quiver in his haunches. Julia strained to see what he was looking at, but there was nothing. Just the shadow of the old wardrobe, the edge of Nora's dresser, a pile of picture books. Nora stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Rex?" she murmured. The dog's tail thumped softly. and the tension in his body faded. Nora smiled, looking up at her mother. "He's okay, Mom. He was just scared." Julia stepped into the room. "What was he growling at?" Nora shrugged, still half asleep. "Rex says there's a sad man, and a bad man looking for something." The words froze Julia in place. She crouched beside her daughter. "Honey, did you have a dream?" Nora shook her head, yawning. "No, Rex told me. He said we're safe with him here." A chill danced down Julia's spine. She pressed a kiss to Nora's forehead, pushing down her own fear. Maybe it was just a child's imagination, wild and untamed. Or maybe Nora was picking up on the tension in the house, the way grief hung in the air like a storm cloud that never fully cleared. She watched as Nora drifted back to sleep, Rex settling down beside her. The big dog sighed, eyes blinking slow, body finally relaxing, as if he trusted this fragile peace. For a long moment, Julia just watched them, her daughter's tiny hand resting on Rex's head, her breath in sync with the dog's. The scene felt both surreal and necessary, as if the universe had sent them exactly what they needed and dared them to trust it. Later that night, Julia sat by the living room window, phone in hand. She hovered over the number for animal control, thumb trembling. Logic screamed at her. This was a stray, possibly dangerous, bringing unknown risks into their home. But another part, deeper and older, told her to wait. Maybe it was the way Rex had looked at Nora, or the way Nora seemed to understand him without words. Maybe it was just hope, desperate for any sign that life could change for the better. She put the phone down, the decision weighing heavy but somehow right. Instead, she opened her old leather-bound journal, one she hadn't touched since David died. The pages smelled of ink and dust, memories pressed between the lines. She wrote, "Tonight, a stranger knocked, and I opened the door. I don't know if I'm crazy, but for the first time since David left, Nora is sleeping without nightmares. For the first time, I feel something besides loss. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's hope. Either way, it's alive." Julia closed the journal, a tear slipping down her cheek, mingling relief with exhaustion. The night wore on. Wind rattled the gutters, but inside, the storm slowly passed. Rex didn't stir again. Nora, too, slept without crying out. As dawn approached, Julia drifted into a shallow sleep on the couch, blanket wrapped tight, the weight of the night heavy but less lonely. When morning finally broke, sunlight crept through the curtains. Julia woke to the sound of giggles. Nora, awake and beaming, already sketching Rex with her crayons. The dog watched her, tail wagging slow, as if he knew this new chapter had just begun. For Julia, the questions lingered. Who was Rex, really? What darkness had he fled? And what did her daughter mean about the sad man and the bad man? But for now, she let herself smile, just a little. The world outside still held storms, but inside they were safe, at least for today. Mornings in the Monroe house had always carried a heaviness since David passed. Breakfast was a quiet ritual. Julia brewed coffee, Nora drew at the kitchen table, silence stretching between them like a thin sheet of ice. But today something was different. Sunlight slanted through the window, catching golden motes in the air. Nora, her hair tangled from sleep, was humming as she colored. Beside her, Rex watched intently, every so often tilting his head, as if admiring her artwork. Julia, clutching her mug, observed them with a strange mixture of hope and worry. She couldn't shake the feeling that this animal, who'd appeared in their lives like a ghost from another world, was already changing the rhythm of their home. After breakfast, Nora scampered off to the living room with her drawing pad and crayons. Julia found her seated cross-legged on the rug, sketching furiously. Rex lay beside her, ears pricked, body still but alert. Julia knelt to see. On the page, Nora had drawn a little cabin tucked beneath tall trees, and beside it, a figure that looked very much like Rex. Julia's brows knit. "Where's that place, honey?" Nora shrugged. "I don't know. I just see it when I close my eyes." She tapped her crayon on the cabin's red door. "Rex lived there before he found us." Julia felt a shiver, remembering Nora's words from the night before about a sad man and a bad man. She reached out, running a gentle hand along Rex's back. The dog startled at her touch, eyes darting up to her face. He flinched, a muscle twitching in his flank. Julia froze. She'd seen that look before, in patients returning from war zones, in kids who jumped at every loud noise. "Easy, boy," she whispered, keeping her movements slow and open. Rex relaxed, but only a little, his tail wagging just once before falling still. She watched him for a while, noting the little signs, a flinch at sudden movement, the way he avoided meeting her eyes for too long, how he seemed to scan the room for exits. Trauma, she realized. Whatever had happened to this dog, it had left marks no one could see. The morning passed with Nora showing Rex her drawings. She sketched him running through tall grass, chasing a butterfly, then stopped suddenly and frowned. Julia knelt beside her. "What's wrong?" Nora held up her newest drawing. There, next to the cabin, was a red pickup truck and a shadowy figure with a hat pulled low. "That man's looking for Rex," Nora said, her voice barely above a whisper. Julia's heart pounded. "Honey, where did you see that truck?" Nora hesitated, then shook her head. "I just know, like a dream, but I'm awake." Julia tried to smile, though worry prickled at her. She squeezed Nora's hand. "Well, Rex is safe with us now." She hoped it was true. That afternoon, Julia decided she couldn't put it off any longer. She needed to find out who Rex belonged to, and whether someone out there was looking for him. She coaxed him into the back seat of her old Subaru, Nora beside him with her drawings and a fistful of dog treats. Rex shivered, panting hard as the car started, his gaze fixed on the passing trees. The drive to the local vet clinic was short but tense. Julia explained to the receptionist that the dog was a stray who'd wandered to their house during the storm. The vet tech nodded and led them into an exam room. Rex resisted at first, but a few kind words and gentle strokes got him onto the table. Dr. Hale, a tall woman with kind eyes and steady hands, examined Rex carefully. She cleaned the wounds on his flank, noting the old scars and recent cuts. "Looks like he's been through a lot," she said softly. "But he's lucky he found you." She scanned for a microchip. The reader beeped. "He's chipped." Dr. Hale turned the screen toward Julia. "His name's Rex. He belonged to a Walter Briggs. Address is on file. I'll print it for you." Walter Briggs. Julia frowned. The name rang a faint bell, maybe from the neighborhood or a news story, but she couldn't place it. Dr. Hale lowered her voice. "I remember Walter. Vietnam vet. Lived alone in a cabin just outside town." She paused. "He passed away about 5 months ago. Heart attack, if I recall." Julia's stomach dropped. So Rex had lost his owner not long after she and Nora lost David. She stroked Rex's fur gently. "What happened to the dog after?" Dr. Hale sighed. "Walter had no close family, just some distant relatives arguing over the property. When animal control finally checked the cabin, Rex was gone. No one knew what happened. Maybe he ran off. Maybe he was driven away." Julia's mind spun. Had Rex been protecting the property after Walter died? Was he hurt in the process? She looked at the fresh and old wounds, picturing the frightened dog, alone in a dark cabin, defending his last connection to the man he loved. On the drive home, Nora was quiet, gazing out the window. Rex rested his head in her lap. As they pulled into the driveway, Nora spoke softly. Walter was the sad man. Rex misses him. Julia squeezed her daughter's hand, a lump in her throat. I know, sweetie. That night, after dinner, Nora drew again. This time she sketched the cabin and a tall oak tree with something buried underneath. What's under the tree? Julia asked, trying to keep her voice light. Nora shrugged. I think it's something important. Rex wants us to find it. Julia studied her daughter's face, searching for a sign she was just playing pretend. But Nora looked deadly serious. Later, when Julia checked on Rex, she found him pacing the hallway, nose to the ground, as if searching for something lost. She watched, wondering about the world inside his head. Memories of a soldier, a lonely cabin, a storm, and a flight through the dark. She saw herself and Nora in that loneliness, a trio bound by invisible threads of loss. Before bed, Julia called the county office. A tired clerk confirmed the story. Walter Briggs had died 5 months earlier. His nephew, Tom Briggs, had shown up after the funeral, causing trouble and contesting the estate. There were rumors of a break-in at the cabin, but nothing was proven. Walter's few friends in the veterans group had tried to step in, but Tom's claims complicated everything. Julia hung up, unsettled. She glanced at Rex, asleep by Nora's bed, his breathing slow and deep. For the first time, she saw not just a stray dog, but a survivor. Someone with a story full of ghosts and unfinished business. That night, Julia dreamed of rain, of footsteps crunching over fallen leaves, and of a dog standing guard at a lonely door, waiting for someone to come home. The Monroe house had always felt lived in, cozy but ordinary, a place of simple routines. But now the air was thick with unspoken questions, and the sense that something bigger had found its way inside their lives. On Saturday morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, painting golden rectangles on the kitchen floor. Julia stood at the counter, pouring milk into Nora's cereal bowl, listening to her daughter hum softly as she drew at the table. Rex lay nearby, paws outstretched, eyes half closed but ears swiveling at every sound. As Julia watched, Nora finished one drawing and slid it aside, immediately beginning another. She'd filled sheet after sheet all morning. Sketches of the cabin, the tall oak, a red pickup, and the same shadowy figure over and over. It was as if the story was pouring out of her hands faster than she could process it. Julia felt a mixture of wonder and unease. Some pictures were so detailed, so vivid, that they seemed almost like memories. "Mom, look," Nora said suddenly, holding up her latest creation. It showed Rex sitting beside the oak tree. Buried beneath its roots was a box, sketched in dark, jagged lines. Next to the tree, the red pickup lurked, and the shadowy man was there too. This time closer, more defined. There was something chilling in the way Nora had drawn his mouth, twisted into a smirk. Julia knelt beside her daughter. "Who is that man, Nora?" Nora tapped her crayon on the figure's head. "He's looking for something. He's angry at Rex for stopping him." Her voice was soft but steady. Rex was trying to protect Walter's things. Julia's hand trembled as she smoothed Nora's hair. She wanted to believe it was all just imagination, but the details in the drawings, details Nora couldn't possibly know, made her stomach twist. She tried to sound casual. "Did Rex tell you this, honey?" Nora nodded. "Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I see things. I think Rex remembers them, and I just... know." A quiet knock at the door made Julia jump. She glanced at Rex. His head was up, body tense, but he didn't bark. Julia peered through the peephole and saw an older man in a baseball cap and a faded army jacket holding a pamphlet from a local veterans organization. She opened the door a crack. "Yes?" "Morning, ma'am. Sorry to bother you. Name's Dennis. I'm with Veterans for Valor. We're checking in on families in the area after the storm. Heard there was a stray German shepherd wandering around. Was hoping to help find his owner." Julia hesitated, then let Dennis inside. Rex stood between them, not growling but watching Dennis with wary eyes. "Is that the dog?" Dennis asked, crouching down carefully. He reached out a hand, palm open. Rex sniffed, then let Dennis scratch behind his ear. "Good boy. I think I've seen you before, old friend." Julia nodded. "The vet says he belonged to Walter Briggs. He showed up here during the storm." Dennis's face fell. "Walter. He was a good man. Fought in Vietnam. Lived up at that old cabin in the woods. When he died, everything went sideways. His nephew Tom started showing up, trying to claim the place. We tried to keep an eye out, but..." Dennis trailed off, voice heavy with guilt. Nora, bold as always, showed Dennis her drawing of the red pickup and the shadowy man. "Is this Tom?" Dennis looked at the picture, then at Julia. "That's him, all right. Tom's trouble. He blames everyone for his bad luck, always looking to pick a fight. After Walter passed, Tom kept saying there was something valuable hidden at the cabin. Money, or maybe papers. No one ever found anything." A shiver went through Julia. "Nora's been having dreams. She drew this," she said, showing Dennis the picture of the box under the oak. "I think she's seeing what Rex remembers." Dennis stared at the drawings, his eyes troubled. "Walter did mention something once. Said he had old files, stuff from the war, locked away safe. Didn't want anyone to find them except someone he trusted." Julia felt the stakes rising, her pulse quickening. "Dennis, do you know anyone who could help, in case Tom comes here?" Dennis nodded. "There's a group of us who look after each other. I'll talk to Marcus. He lives 2 streets over. Retired police. He can check on you." As Dennis left, Julia felt a surge of gratitude but also a creeping sense of dread. She went to the living room, installed the new security camera she'd bought online weeks ago but never bothered to set up. Rex followed her, tail low, eyes worried. That night, Nora crawled into Julia's bed, clutching her drawings. "I don't want to sleep alone," she whispered. Julia hugged her close. "It's okay. Rex is here, I'm here, no one's getting in." But Julia barely slept. Around 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. A motion alert from the new camera. Heart pounding, she opened the app. The grainy black and white video showed a pickup truck idling across the street. Even in the dark, Julia recognized it. A battered red Ford, its paint dulled by age. The driver sat there for nearly 10 minutes, then drove away. Julia's breath came in short, sharp bursts. She crept to Nora's room, checked that the windows were locked, checked the front and back doors. Rex padded after her, ever alert. The next morning, she called the local sheriff and explained the situation. The deputy listened patiently, but explained they couldn't do much without proof of trespassing or a direct threat. "Keep your doors locked," he said. "If you see anything suspicious, call us right away." Later that day, Julia reached out to the veterans group, asking for help. She sent photos of Nora's drawings and the video clip of the red pickup. Within hours, Dennis responded, promising to swing by that evening with Marcus. With the sun setting, Marcus arrived, a big man with silver hair, a slow, easy smile, and sharp eyes. He walked the perimeter of Julia's yard, checked the locks, and suggested adding extra lights. "You did the right thing calling us," he said quietly. "Tom's got a temper. Best to be ready. That night, Julia finally sat down with her old journal, writing by lamplight as Nora and Rex slept. She poured out her fears, her hopes, the way her daughter seemed to see into the heart of things. She wrote about Rex, how he and Nora both seemed broken by loss, yet healing each other, slowly, in the fragile light of their new life. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the branches. Julia closed her journal and listened, grateful for the simple, steadfast presence of the dog at her daughter's side. But as she checked the security footage one last time before bed, she saw the red pickup again, this time moving slowly past the house, headlights off, shadowy figure behind the wheel. Julia shivered, pressing her palm to the window, determined to protect her family no matter what the night brought. The days grew colder, the air tinged with the scent of autumn leaves and distant wood smoke. Julia Monroe stood on her porch, watching Rex patrol the front yard with a soldier's vigilance, his head swiveling at every distant sound. The previous nights had been sleepless, haunted by headlights sweeping past their windows and the recurring image of that battered red pickup truck idling in the shadows. Every day, Nora's drawings grew darker, more urgent, more messages from places Julia couldn't reach. The veterans group came through quickly. With their help, Julia managed to secure temporary legal access to Walter Briggs' old cabin, buried deep in the fir woods north of town. She didn't tell Nora everything, just that they were going on a little adventure, that it would help Rex. Nora, ever sensitive to moods, only nodded, hugging Rex close. "He wants to go," she said simply, as if she'd been waiting for this trip all along. Marcus, the retired cop and neighbor, offered to drive. He arrived early Saturday morning, thermos of coffee in hand, his old badge clipped to his belt for reassurance. "Better safe than sorry," he said, his eyes catching the tension in Julia's jaw. Julia loaded Nora and Rex into the back seat, locking the front door twice before she left. The drive to the cabin was tense, the woods closing in around them, the road narrowing to little more than a gravel track. Every bump seemed to jolt Julia's nerves. Rex pressed his nose to the window, whining softly as they approached a rusted metal gate strung with faded no trespassing signs. The air was still, heavy with the memory of secrets. Marcus got out and opened the gate. Rex jumped down first, tail stiff, scanning the clearing. Nora slid out, clutching her latest drawing, Rex, the oak tree, a box buried deep. "He knows where to go," she whispered, grabbing Julia's hand. The cabin sagged in the clearing, weathered boards gray with age, windows dusted with cobwebs, the front door hung askew, and Julia could see where someone, Tom, she guessed, had tried to pry the lock. Inside, the air was cold and still, the faint scent of tobacco and old coffee lingering like a ghost. Rex padded forward, nose to the ground, ignoring every distraction. He led them through the front room, past a shelf stacked with war medals and faded photographs, out the back door into a wild yard scattered with broken branches and fallen leaves. Beyond the garden fence, an ancient oak tree loomed, its roots knotted above the ground. Rex circled the trunk, digging at the soil with desperate energy. Nora knelt beside him, fingers tracing the pattern in the bark. "It's here," she murmured, eyes unfocused. "It's buried here." Julia and Marcus exchanged a look, skeptical, but unable to deny the urgency in Nora's voice or the way Rex clawed at the dirt, frantic. They dug together, the ground stubborn and cold. After 20 minutes, Julia's hands were raw, her breath coming in ragged bursts. But there was nothing, just rocks and tangled roots. The earth refusing to give up its secrets. Marcus checked his watch, glancing nervously back at the tree line. "We need to be careful," he said. "This place isn't as empty as it looks." Frustration prickled Julia's skin. Nora wiped her muddy hands on her jeans, looking disappointed but oddly calm. "Maybe it's not time yet," she said, her words carrying a weight beyond her years. As they prepared to leave, a sound cut through the silence, a low rumble, then the crunch of tires on gravel. Julia's heart skipped. The red pickup emerged from the trees, dust swirling in its wake. The driver lingered behind tinted glass, engine idling, headlights off despite the gloom. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Marcus stepped forward, his hand on his badge. The truck's engine revved, then reversed out of the clearing and disappeared into the woods. Julia's hands shook as she gathered Nora and Rex. "That's him," she whispered to Marcus. "That's Tom Briggs." They loaded back into the car and left the cabin behind, nerves strung tight. The drive home felt endless, every glance in the mirror shadowed by the fear of being followed. Sure enough, halfway back to town, Julia spotted the red pickup in the distance. Never close enough to confront, but always there, lurking at the edge of her vision. For several miles it tailed them, headlights flicking on and off, sometimes vanishing completely, only to reappear further down the road. Nora held Rex in the back seat, whispering comfort. "He won't let him hurt us," she said with quiet certainty. "He's watching over us." When they reached the safety of their street, the red truck was gone. Marcus insisted on checking the perimeter before he left, walking the house with his flashlight. Every shadow, now a potential threat. That night, Julia lay awake, every muscle tense, replaying the events at the cabin. She kept the phone by her side and a kitchen chair propped under the doorknob. Nora fell asleep with Rex curled up at her feet, one hand tangled in his fur, the other clutching her newest drawing, a picture of the oak tree with the box still hidden, but now there were watchful eyes in the darkness all around. Julia wrote in her journal, pouring out her fears and confusion. "What are we missing?" she scribbled. "Why is Tom so desperate? What did Walter leave behind that's worth all this?" The next morning, a letter from the county legal office arrived, granting Julia temporary guardianship over Rex until Walter's estate was settled. The letter felt like a lifeline, a small victory against the rising tide of chaos. But when Julia looked out the window, she saw muddy tire tracks on the street, fresh, still damp from the dew, right in front of their house. The threat was no longer distant. Julia's suspicion hardened into certainty. Tom Briggs was a danger, not just to them, but to whatever secret Walter had tried so hard to protect. She sat on the porch with Rex at her feet, watching the world in the slanting morning light. Rex was restless, ears alert, gaze always shifting to the shadows. Nora came outside, sleepy-eyed, and sat beside her mother. She put her head on Julia's shoulder, silent for a while. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "He won't stop until he finds what he's looking for. But Rex won't let him." Julia wrapped her arm around her daughter, feeling the steady heartbeat of the dog at her feet, and tried to believe her. The next few days at the Monroe house passed under a cloud of tension. Julia's nerves felt permanently stretched, every sound in the night making her jump, every flash of headlights on the street outside enough to send her heart pounding. She tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Nora, packing lunches, helping with homework, keeping up the routine. But even Nora seemed to sense the fragile edge of safety they balanced on. Rex, once content to doze at Nora's feet, now patrolled the house with a restless, anxious energy. He barked at shadows, paced by the doors, and spent long hours staring out the window, hackles raised. It was as if he could smell danger drifting in on the cold autumn wind. After the incident at the cabin, Julia knew she couldn't rely on luck or hope alone. She installed more security cameras around the house with Marcus's help and swapped out the old locks for newer, heavier deadbolts. Marcus came by almost every evening now, checking in under the guise of borrowing sugar or dropping off extra firewood. His calm presence brought some comfort, but even he seemed on alert. One night, after Nora and Rex had gone to bed, Julia sat at the kitchen table with Marcus, reviewing the new footage from the security cameras. She clicked through hours of uneventful video. Squirrels running along the fence, a neighbor's cat slinking by, until suddenly something made her freeze. The timestamp read 2:18 a.m. The image was grainy but clear enough. A figure crept along the side of the house, half crouched, carrying what looked like a crowbar and a duffel bag. The man's movements were jerky, as if he was glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. Julia's blood ran cold as she recognized the shape and build. Tom Briggs. Marcus leaned in, jaw tightening. That's him, no doubt. He's getting bolder. The footage showed Tom testing windows, circling the backyard, and finally moving out of frame when a porch light flickered on. Rex could be seen in another camera, pacing furiously, barking at the door, every muscle tense. Julia shivered. What if he tries again? What if we're not here next time? Marcus put a reassuring hand over hers. You did the right thing, upgrading the security. But it's time to get the police involved again. Show them this footage. It's enough for a restraining order at least, maybe more. The next morning, Julia called the local sheriff, this time with video evidence. A deputy arrived, reviewed the footage, and filed a formal report. We'll step up patrols, he promised, and we'll notify the other officers to keep an eye out for that truck. If you see anything, call us right away. Don't try to confront him. Still, Julia couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. Tom was desperate, cunning, and clearly convinced that something valuable was hidden, something Walter Briggs left behind. Maybe in the cabin, maybe elsewhere. That night, with rain ticking softly against the windows, Nora had another one of her visions. She sat at the kitchen table, her coloring book abandoned in favor of a fresh sheet of printer paper. She drew with swift, urgent lines, barely looking up. When she finished, she held up the page for Julia to see. A rough sketch of a wooden floorboard with the number 108 written across it. Rex showed me, Nora said, her voice sleepy and distant. Under the floor. There's something there. Julia stared at the drawing, her mind racing. Floorboard 108. Could it be a clue? Something only Rex would know. Something left behind in Walter's cabin. She quickly scribbled the number into her journal just in case. The following day, Julia reached out to Dennis, the head of the veterans group, and explained what was happening. The threats, the break-in, the growing sense that Tom was closing in. Dennis was quiet for a long moment. Walter told me once, he finally said, if anything ever happened to him, not to trust his nephew. Said he kept his real valuables hidden, not money but old war documents, stuff he didn't want falling into the wrong hands. I never thought Tom would go this far. Dennis promised to gather a few trusted friends to keep watch. That night, Marcus came by again, bringing his old service revolver, just in case, and a baseball bat he left by the back door. Don't be afraid to call for help, he told Julia. We're not letting anyone hurt you or Nora. Julia hugged him in gratitude, then spent an hour talking with Nora before bedtime, trying to reassure her that they were safe. Nora listened quietly, then reached over to pat Rex. He's scared too, Mom. He thinks the bad man is coming soon. Later that night, Julia checked all the locks, peeked at the security monitors, and tried to settle her nerves. She fell into a restless sleep on the couch, journal in her lap. Around 3 a.m., Rex began to bark, a deep, furious sound that rattled the windows. Julia jerked awake, heart racing, and ran to the door. Through the peephole, she saw movement in the backyard, a shadow darting between the trees. She grabbed her phone and called 911, voice shaking but determined. "Stay on the line," the dispatcher urged. "Officers are en route." Rex pressed himself against the door, hackles raised, tail rigid, every sense locked on the threat outside. Nora appeared in the hallway, sleepy and frightened, but Julia quickly ushered her into the back bedroom, away from the windows. For several long minutes, the house was a fortress of tension. Julia holding her breath, Rex growling low and steady, Nora clinging to her stuffed rabbit. Then flashing red and blue lights spilled across the curtains. The police swept the yard but found only muddy footprints and a few broken branches where Tom had fled. A deputy took Julia's statement and promised extra patrols, but the fear lingered. After the officers left, Julia tucked Nora back into bed and sat for a long time with Rex, stroking his fur, feeling his heartbeat slow beneath her hand. "You're not alone," she wrote in her journal that night. "You have us, Rex. We'll keep you safe, just like you're keeping us safe." And as the first light of dawn crept over the neighborhood, Julia realized she was no longer just afraid. She was angry, determined to protect her daughter and this loyal dog who'd become their guardian. She wasn't going to run. She was going to fight back. The morning after Tom's latest intrusion, the Monroe house felt as if it had weathered not just a storm, but a siege. Julia's nerves were stretched thin, but beneath the exhaustion, a spark of resolve had taken hold. She was done living in fear. With the police now treating their case seriously, Marcus and Dennis on call, and her own determination hardened, Julia was ready to face whatever secrets lay waiting at Walter Briggs's cabin. After dropping Nora at school, where Dennis's wife, a retired teacher, promised to keep a close watch, Julia returned home, packed a flashlight, gloves, a crowbar, and a roll of duct tape into a tote bag. Rex sat by the door, alert and eager, as if sensing the day's importance. When Marcus arrived with the sheriff's deputy, there was no need for words. Everyone knew their roles. The drive to the cabin was tense. Fallen leaves swirled in their wake. The road dappled in sunlight and shadow. Rex rode in the back seat, his eyes fixed on the window, his body quivering with nervous anticipation. Marcus drove, hands steady on the wheel, his voice a quiet anchor when Julia's anxiety threatened to break loose. "Whatever we find," he said, "we'll handle it. You're not alone." As the cabin came into view, Julia's heart thudded. The front yard was undisturbed, but tire tracks, fresh, muddy, ran up to the porch. The sheriff's deputy walked the perimeter, scanning for signs of recent activity. Satisfied they were alone, he waved Julia and Marcus inside. The cabin was colder and gloomier than before. Julia moved through the rooms, guided by Nora's drawing, floorboard 108. She counted each board, her breath fogging in the chill, until she reached the one marked in her daughter's sketch. Rex pressed his nose to the wood, whining, then pawed insistently at the edge. Marcus pried at the board with the crowbar. With a groan and a splinter, the board lifted away, revealing a shallow cavity beneath. Julia's pulse raced. She reached in, her fingers brushing against cold metal. She pulled out a battered strongbox, locked and covered in dust. The deputy examined it, then nodded for Julia to continue. She rifled through her bag, found the crowbar again, and wedged it under the lid. With a pop, the lock snapped. Inside lay a bundle of old documents, military files stamped confidential, faded photographs, and a velvet bag that clinked with medals. Tucked beneath the files was a bundle of letters, the paper yellowed but carefully preserved. Marcus whistled low. This is big. Looks like Walter really did hide something. As Julia leafed through the documents, her hands shook. One folder detailed covert operations, dates, names, maps, evidence of something illegal, something that would ruin reputations if revealed. She scanned a letter from Walter addressed to whoever finds this, a warning, a plea to bring the truth to light, and an explanation for why he'd kept the evidence hidden for so long. Her heart twisted. Walter hadn't just been protecting his property. He'd been protecting people, too. Maybe even his own life. Suddenly, Rex's hackles rose. He lunged at the window, barking furiously. Julia's breath caught. A shout rang out from outside, the unmistakable bellow of Tom Briggs. "Give me the box!" Tom's voice thundered from the porch. The front door burst open, slamming against the wall. Tom barreled in, wild-eyed, brandishing a tire iron. The deputy stepped between him and Julia, badge out, gun drawn. "Stay where you are, Tom. You're trespassing." But Tom's focus was razor-sharp. He wanted the strongbox. "It's mine!" he screamed, shoving the deputy aside. In the chaos, Rex leapt between Julia and Tom, snarling with a ferocity Julia had never seen. Tom swung at Rex, but the dog dodged, lunging and clamping his jaws onto Tom's arm. Tom howled, dropping the tire iron. Marcus and the deputy moved in, wrestling Tom to the floor. The struggle was brief but brutal. Rex stayed close, teeth bared, ready to protect Julia at any cost. Finally, Tom was handcuffed, red-faced and cursing, his eyes darting toward the strongbox on the floor. The deputy read Tom his rights while Marcus checked Julia and Rex for injuries. Julia's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the strongbox. Rex was limping, but alive, eyes still locked on Tom with unwavering focus. Marcus pressed a reassuring hand to Julia's shoulder. "It's over. He's not going to hurt anyone now." As the police led Tom away, Julia knelt and hugged Rex, burying her face in his fur. "Thank you," she whispered, her tears soaking into his coat. She felt his heartbeat. Steady, strong, loyal. The aftermath unfolded in a blur. Officers collected the strongbox as evidence. Julia gave a statement, explaining what they'd found and how. The documents inside told the story Walter had tried to hide. Records of war crimes, bribes, and operations that would have destroyed more than one man's reputation if made public. Walter's medals and letters were kept safe, a testament to his honor and his burden. When the sheriff thanked Julia, he looked at Rex and shook his head in admiration. "He saved you," he said simply. "You should be proud." Later that day, Julia drove home in silence. Marcus followed in his own car, promising to check in later. Nora ran out to greet them, her face pale with worry until she saw Rex and Julia were safe. Julia hugged her daughter fiercely, unable to speak as relief and exhaustion washed over her. That evening, the three of them, Julia, Nora, and Rex, sat in the living room, the strongbox now locked in a police evidence room, the worst danger behind them. But the scars remained. Rex limped and whimpered as Nora laid her stuffed rabbit beside him, stroking his fur with gentle hands. As dusk fell, Julia watched Rex sleep, Nora's hand resting on his side, and wrote in her journal, "He protected us, just like he protected Walter. The truth is safe now. Maybe we are too." But in the quiet, Julia couldn't shake the memory of Walter's warning, or the image of Tom's desperate face. She realized that the scars people carry, visible or not, can shape destinies and draw strangers together. And sometimes, healing begins only after the truth is brought out of hiding, no matter how painful or dangerous it might be. Rex had guarded more than just a house. He had protected a legacy, a truth, and a family that desperately needed saving. The days after Tom's arrest unfolded like a long exhale. The town buzzed with whispers about the secrets uncovered in Walter Briggs's cabin, and the Monroe house finally felt, if not untouched by darkness, then at least less haunted. Julia watched the world from her kitchen window, taking comfort in the familiar sounds of Nora playing with crayons, the kettle whistling, and the steady, reassuring presence of Rex curled on the living room rug. But beneath the fragile peace, an undertow of sorrow was pulling, slow and inevitable. Rex's limp had worsened since the struggle at the cabin. He moved more slowly now, pausing at each stair, sometimes collapsing into a nap, as if the act of simply being in the world was too much weight to bear. Nora never left his side. She'd lay her head on his chest and whisper stories, sometimes drifting off into sleep with her hand knotted in his fur. Julia tried to stay optimistic. The vet came and went, offering gentle words and pain medication, but her face was grave. "He's done more than most humans ever will," she said softly. "You should keep him comfortable and give him as much love as you can." That night, the house was awash in the blue light of the television, though none of them were really watching. Nora sat on the floor, cradling her stuffed rabbit and resting her head on Rex's side. Julia sat close, her journal open in her lap, but the words wouldn't come. She could only watch her daughter and the dog, wondering how she would ever fill the void he would leave behind. A soft rain began to fall, tapping gently at the windows. Rex's breathing grew heavier, a little more ragged with each passing hour. It was as if his final task, protecting Julia and Nora, unearthing the truth about Walter, had burned through the last of his strength. Nora looked up, her eyes shining with that eerie, peaceful wisdom that sometimes unsettled Julia. "It's almost time," she said quietly. "Rex is tired, but he's not scared. The sad man is waiting for him now." Julia's throat tightened. She brushed a hand over Rex's fur, feeling the warmth beneath her palm, the rise and fall of his shallow breaths. "You're a good boy, Rex," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Thank you for loving us. Thank you for staying." As midnight approached, Rex struggled to his feet, swaying for a moment as if uncertain. Nora sprang up and opened the back door. Cold, fresh air rushed in, and Rex shuffled slowly onto the porch. Nora followed, clutching her rabbit. Julia wrapped a blanket around herself and stepped into the yard, feeling the damp grass under her feet, the chill of night on her skin. Rex crossed the yard and lay down beneath the old oak tree, the place that had lived in Nora's drawings for weeks. The earth there was still disturbed, a reminder of secrets and scars. He settled, curling into a ball, eyes half closed but aware, as if he could sense something or someone waiting beyond the veil. Nora knelt beside him, gently placing her stuffed rabbit next to his paw. She whispered something only he could hear. Julia sat down, gathering her daughter and the dog in her arms. The three of them, a family shaped by grief and healing, huddled together under the moonlit sky. The hours passed in quiet vigil. Julia stroked Rex's fur, telling him over and over that he was brave, that he was loved, that he was safe. Nora sang a lullaby she remembered from when she was small, the melody rising and falling with the wind. Just before dawn, the first pale light broke through the clouds, painting the oak tree in gold. Rex lifted his head one last time, looking from Nora to Julia and back, as if taking in the faces of his family. His eyes softened, and with a final shuddering breath, he let go. The world seemed to hold its breath. Julia pressed her face into his fur, tears streaming down her cheeks. Nora laid her hand gently on Rex's heart and whispered, "Goodbye, friend. The sad man is waiting for you now. You can rest." For a long while they stayed beneath the oak tree, the two of them cradling the dog who had held them together when everything else was falling apart. The sunrise warmed their backs, and the rain stopped, leaving the world hushed and new. Later, Marcus and Dennis came by, standing in silence beside the grave Julia and Nora dug under the oak. They buried Rex with his collar and a photo of Walter, and Nora tucked her rabbit beside him for company. The grown-ups said few words, none were really needed. Marcus pressed a hand to Julia's shoulder. "He did his duty to the very end," he said quietly. That evening, as darkness fell again, the Monroe house was quieter than ever. But the quiet was not empty. Julia sat at the table, her journal open, writing through the blur of her tears. Grief is not a storm, but a tide. It comes in, fills the house, then slowly recedes, leaving something changed. Rex didn't just save us from danger, he saved us from despair. He carried Walter's sorrow and gave us hope in its place. His paw prints are everywhere, in our hearts and on the ground beneath the old oak tree. That night, Nora fell asleep in Julia's arms. Outside, the oak tree stood guard over Rex, and Julia knew that even in loss, there was a kind of peace, one born of loyalty, sacrifice, and love. And somewhere, in the space between dreams and memory, Julia believed that Walter was waiting on the other side, and that Rex was finally home. The days after Rex's burial drifted by slowly, colored by the hush of early autumn. The world seemed to pause in the wake of his passing, as if the house and all it held were waiting for life to start again. The loss felt as heavy as the first frost, sharp in the morning, softening as the sun climbed and memories settled into their new place. Julia awoke to a house that felt changed. The familiar routines were there. Nora's quiet footsteps in the hallway, the hum of the kettle, the gentle clutter of breakfast. But everything moved more slowly, the energy different, as if they were both learning how to exist in this new absence. The spot where Rex had slept by the door was empty, but Nora still set her slippers there each night, as if hoping he might return in her dreams. At first, the grief was heavy and raw, a physical ache in Julia's chest. But as the days turned into weeks, a softer kind of sorrow crept in, a mourning that left room for gratitude, for memory, for the quiet ways a loyal friend's love endures even after he's gone. Julia found herself reaching for her journal more often, the pages filling with thoughts that hurt less with each line. Rex taught us not just to endure loss, but to grow around it. Nora, too, was different. She talked more now, her voice carrying in the house as she sang to her toys or narrated the stories in her drawings. She sketched wildflowers, the oak tree, and sometimes, quietly, a German shepherd in the corner of the page, watchful, at peace. It was as if Rex's presence had given her permission to let go of her own sadness, to open herself up to the world again. One morning, Julia found Nora in the backyard, kneeling in the grass with her sketchbook. The oak tree above cast dappled shadows, and in its shade, the earth over Rex's grave was soft and new. Nora was planting wildflower seeds, tiny bursts of color she pressed gently into the soil. Julia crouched beside her, hands in the dirt, and together they worked in silence, the quiet a comfort rather than a burden. Later that week, Marcus stopped by with a flat of wildflower starters and a letter from the local veterans group. The group had heard what happened, how Rex had protected Julia and Nora, how his actions had helped reveal the truth Walter Briggs had tried so hard to preserve. They wanted to honor Walter posthumously and quietly in their own way, to thank Rex for his final act of loyalty. The small ceremony was held at the cabin beneath the oak tree. Julia, Nora, Marcus, Dennis, and a handful of Walter's old friends gathered in the crisp morning air. They laid wildflowers over the patch of earth where the strongbox had been found, sharing stories about Walter's courage and the quiet dignity of a man who tried to do what was right, even when no one was looking. The vet group presented a folded American flag, and Julia accepted it with tears in her eyes. Rex's role was acknowledged not with fanfare but with a simple plaque beneath the oak. For Rex, faithful guardian, who protected more than a home. Nora pressed her hand to the wood, whispering a thank you. As the days grew shorter and the air colder, the Monroe house slowly filled with warmth again. Julia hung Rex's collar by the front door and placed the stuffed rabbit beside it, a silent tribute to the friend who had changed their lives. She returned to her painting, her brush moving with a freedom she hadn't felt in years, colors blooming where there had once been only gray. Nora's nightmares faded. She spoke with new confidence, telling her friends at school about the brave dog who had come to live with her family, how he watched over her and protected her from shadows. When she drew now, her pictures were full of sunlight and open doors, of gardens and new beginnings. Julia wrote in her journal almost every night, her words both a memorial and a map. She wrote about the courage it takes to open your door to a stranger, the way grief lingers but doesn't define you, and the quiet moments of healing that slip in when you least expect them. One entry stood out, a thought she returned to again and again. Rex didn't save us from danger. He saved us from despair. In his silence, in his watchful eyes, we found a way to hope again. That fall, Julia, Nora, and Marcus made one last trip to the cabin, carrying a basket of wildflowers and a thermos of hot cider. The forest was ablaze with color, the air clean and sharp. They scattered flower petals at the base of the oak, where sunlight filtered through the branches and painted gold across the ground. As they sat together, Julia felt a peace she hadn't known in a long time. The weight of the past had shifted, no longer an anchor, but a foundation. She looked at Nora, laughing with Marcus over a silly joke, and realized how far they'd come. They were changed, yes, but not broken. Grief had made room for joy. That night, back home, Julia found herself watching the stars from the porch, Rex's collar warm in her hand. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet thanks, not just for protection, but for the presence that had carried them through the darkest storm. She felt, for the first time, that she could breathe easy, that the worst had passed, and that healing was not just possible, but real. In the end, the story of Rex was not just about a dog who guarded a family, but about the quiet, steadfast love that endures loss and the hope that follows in its wake. Rex had been a bridge, carrying them from sorrow into the bright, open field of tomorrow. Life moved gently into winter, and the ache of losing Rex softened into something warm and permanent, an invisible thread woven through every day. The house on Sycamore Lane was quieter, but not empty. It breathed with new routines. Nora's laughter echoing down the hallway, the hum of Julia's old radio as she painted, Marcus dropping by with a smile and an armful of groceries. The shadows that once haunted their lives had thinned, replaced by sunlight streaming through the kitchen window and the sweet scent of wildflowers on the sill. Nora's 7th birthday dawned with a bright sky and a flurry of little surprises. Homemade pancakes, a card from Marcus with a silly joke, and a drawing taped to her door that Julia had made, showing Nora, herself, and Rex sitting together beneath the oak tree. The pain of the dog's absence was still sharp, but today it felt like love. It was gratitude for all that Rex had given them. Just after breakfast, a gentle knock came at the door. When Julia opened it, she was met by Dennis from the veterans group, grinning, his hands clasped behind his back. Standing beside him was a volunteer holding a leash. At the other end, sitting calmly with head high and eyes bright, was a German shepherd puppy, paws comically oversized, ears still floppy, tail wagging with nervous energy. Nora gasped, hands flying to her mouth. She knelt on the porch, meeting the puppy's curious gaze. For a moment, neither moved. Then the puppy padded forward, nose twitching, and pressed his head against Nora's chest, sighing contentedly. Dennis cleared his throat. "We heard about everything that happened. There's a group for retired service dogs, and sometimes they have pups who need homes. This little guy's been waiting for the right family." Julia's eyes filled with tears. Grief and joy all tangled up, the two feelings indistinguishable for a moment. She looked at Nora, whose face was shining, and at the puppy, who seemed to sense that something momentous was happening. Nora stroked the pup's fur, then looked up, her voice clear and sure. "His name is Hero," she declared, as if she'd always known. The puppy barked softly, and Dennis laughed. "Well, Hero it is." They brought Hero inside, the air in the house instantly lighter. The puppy trotted from room to room, sniffing at corners, poking his nose under the table, and finally pausing at the back door. He sat and looked out toward the oak tree where Rex rested. Nora followed, silent for a moment, then opened the door. Together, she and Hero walked to the tree, sunbeams warming their faces. Nora knelt by the grave, tracing her fingers over the plaque beneath the roots. "Hi, Rex," she whispered. "Thank you for being our guardian. Hero is here now. I'll take care of him." Hero sat quietly beside her, tail thumping in the grass, as if acknowledging the importance of this place, of the promise being made. Julia watched from the porch, heart full to the brim. She felt the weight of memory and the lightness of hope mingling in her chest. She knew that loss never disappeared, but that love made room for new beginnings. As she stepped outside, Hero turned to look at her, amber eyes bright with trust. For a heartbeat, Julia could have sworn she saw Rex's steady gaze in that young, eager face. That afternoon, Julia, Nora, and Marcus gathered in the backyard. Marcus brought a new ball, and they spent an hour laughing as Hero bounded through the grass, tripping over his own feet. When the sun began to set, they sat together on the porch, sharing stories of Rex, of Walter, of the storm that brought them all together. Nora cuddled Hero close and asked Julia, "Do you think Rex is happy now?" Julia smiled, stroking her daughter's hair. "I do. I think he's with Walter, and they're both proud of us. And I think he sent Hero to watch over you now." Nora nodded, satisfied, her face aglow with a kind of peace that only children possess. Hero licked her cheek and curled up beside her, already home. As night fell and stars blinked on overhead, Julia sat with her journal in her lap, her pen moving easily across the page. Some protectors don't vanish. They just wait until they're needed again. Every soul who loves well becomes a bridge for another to heal. Hero isn't here to replace Rex. He's here to remind us that love is never really gone. It simply changes shape, moving from one heart to another, guarding us through every new beginning. Days passed, and with them, healing. The wildflowers Nora and Julia planted bloomed in bursts of blue, yellow, and violet. Neighbors dropped by more often, drawn by the story of the brave dog and the new puppy, and laughter returned to the Monroe house like a long-awaited friend. On weekends, they visited the cabin to tend wildflowers beneath the oak. Sometimes Julia painted while Nora and Hero played. The veterans group honored Walter's memory every year, and the plaque beneath the tree became a quiet symbol of courage, sacrifice, and the invisible bonds that tie people and animals together across loss and time. For Julia, there was a new confidence in her steps, a sense of belonging that had been missing since David's death. She was not the same woman who had locked her doors against the storm, paralyzed by grief and fear. She was someone who had faced the darkness, opened her heart, and been blessed, first by a wounded, loyal shepherd, and now by the legacy he left behind. On the anniversary of Rex's arrival, Julia, Nora, and Hero sat beneath the oak tree as the sunset painted the sky in streaks of gold and rose. Julia closed her eyes, listening to the wind in the branches, feeling the weight and wonder of all that had come before. "If this story moved you, share it," she wrote in her journal that night. "Somewhere, someone is still waiting for a guardian they don't know they need." Sometimes love knocks at the door in the middle of a storm. All you have to do is open it. And so the story of Rex, and now Hero, became more than a memory. It became a legacy. In every footstep, in every wildflower, in every act of kindness, his spirit lingered, a gentle reminder that guardians never truly leave. They simply make way for the next soul to love and protect.